think about taxes, not just as a taxpayer, but thinking about the overall tax system and actually who bears the burden of taxation. Even though we seem to be doing pretty well in terms of mitigating or decreasing measured income inequality in a lot of the Western world, we're doing a very poor job of addressing income inequality at the extreme parts of distribution. So it's kind of a technical issue about how we measure income inequality, but it turns out that our measure of income inequality is really about what happens in the middle of the distribution. And so if there's large decreases in incomes for people at the low end of the distribution, low income earners, or large increases in incomes for people who are at the high end of the income distribution, those really high income earners, our measures of income inequality and measures of income inequality don't pick up those changes. And so we think that we're doing a very good job of addressing income inequality, when in fact it can be getting worse just because our measurements aren't really adequate. And that's something that economists are often accused of, and rightly so, that we tend to look where the light is the best. There's nothing to worry about the economist who's lost his keys on his way back from the car and is walking around underneath the street light looking for them. When a police officer comes by and says, what are you doing? And he says, oh, I'm looking for my keys. The police officer says, well, where do you live from? And he says, oh, over there by the door. He said, well, why are you looking here? Oh, well, the light's better. And so economists tend to get kind of narrowed in on something and lose the actual issue. But it turns out with income inequality, we've been looking where the light, not only where the light is better, but at the place where people seem to be interested now for about 10 years, and that's the extreme part of the income distribution, particularly the top income earners, that 1%, that big 99% he's talking about. And so I brought a couple of numbers here I'd share with you about what's going on with these high income earners. So some trends in Canada. If you look at the income share of the top 1% of income earners in Canada in 1933, okay, that's a long time ago. None of us were around, I don't think then. It would be 18%. So the top 1% of income earners in Canada in 1933 earned 18% of all income in Canada in that year. If you looked in 1943, that has decreased 10 years later to 10%. By the time we reached 1982, the top 1%, the share of income earned by the top 1% has decreased to 7.5%. So we've been doing quite well with reducing income inequality by addressing the extreme part of distribution. But if we look at the number of the share of income earned by the top 1% in 2007, it's up to 14%. So we've seen over time, from the 1930s, is a marked decline in the share of total income earned by the top 1% of income earners until about 1982, at which point it reverses trend and starts to go up, and it seems to be continuing to climb. Okay, and if we want to look at the income share at the top 0.01%, okay, so 0.01%, in 2007, they earned 5.5% of all income. And we look at the top 0.01% in 2007, they earned 2.5% of all income earned in Canada. So you can see that we're getting more and more concentration. If you look at these 0.01, 0.001, 0.00001%, the trend is continuing that at the extreme part of distribution, the more extreme we look, the higher their share of income is increasing. Okay? So what else has changed about these high income earners in Canada in the last 100 years is the composition of their earnings. So if we look in 1946, for example, 55% of all the income earned by that top 1% was from wages. 33% was from entrepreneurial activity, so owning a business. And 12% was from capital income. If we look at the composition of the income earned by the top 1% income earners in 2007, 70% is wages, 15% is entrepreneurial income, and 15% is capital income. So what's going on? More of these people in the top 1% are earning their income from wages than in 1946. Okay, the proportion that's earned from entrepreneurial activity has declined since 1946, and the proportion coming from capital income has stayed about the same. Okay, so these are things I'm going to point to when I think about what kinds of policies we can use to address this growing income inequality in Canada. Before I do that, I just want to talk about what's going on in British Columbia. So looking at the numbers for BC, the share of income earned by the top 1% in 1982 was pre-tax 7.8% or post-tax 6.6%. And in 2007, that share of the top 1% was pre-tax 13% or post-tax 12%. So it's about double over the past 25 years. Okay? Just in case you're curious as whether you fall into the 1% or not, the threshold for being in the 1% based on your 2007 income would have been $163,000. Okay, so if you earn $163,000, you are the 1%. When you talk to the 99%, you should know that you're not one of them, you're one of the 1%. Okay? Not that there's anything wrong with that. Oh, we could all be in the 1%, that would be great. Okay, so a couple other insights from the top income data. The probability, one thing that we're interested in, I guess, as economists and the public is interested in is the intergenerational transmission of inequality. You know, if you're born into a rich family, are you going to stay rich? If you're born into a poor family, are you going to stay poor? What we can see from these top income earners is that the probability of staying in the 0.01% group, not just the 1%, but the 0.01% group, 1 year later is 62%. 2 years later is 47%. 3 years later is 38%. It declines quite quickly. So that suggests that while it's true that the income, that there's a lot of intergenerational transmission of inequality, or individuals born into low-income households tend to be more likely to live in a low-income household when they reach working age, and individuals who are born into a high-income household are more likely to remain in a high-income household when they reach working age. But there is some movement in and out of these top income earners, which tells a little bit about what's going on with how they're earning those wages as well. Stock options and things like that. When you actually get to exercise those options, when you want to bear the burden of taxation that comes along with those. And one last thing about the top incomes before I talk about taxes is that French-speaking wage earners in Quebec earn much less than English-speaking wage earners in Quebec. Okay, now that's true across the distribution, but it's more marked at the top end of the distribution, that is, say, at the median or mean distribution. And what this also suggests is that the kinds of people who are in these positions where they're in the top 1% have outside options if they speak English, but not so much if they speak French. And so that tells us a little bit about how if we want to address this issue with taxes, we have to be wary of the fact that the tax base may be somewhat robust. Okay, and so this evidence that French English-speaking Canadians who are in the top 1% earn much lower than earn much less than English-speaking Canadians in the top 1% suggests that what's going on, some of these individuals could easily go to work in the United States for high income if they're English-speaking, but that's not the case if they speak French. So before we do talk about what we could do to address income inequality, we should think about the things that we have accomplished in the last 30, 40, 50 years. The first is there's been a dramatic decline in poverty for seniors and for children. Okay, so we've done a very good job at targeting low-income individuals who happen to be children or who happen to be senior citizens. So that's it as far as what we can pat ourselves on the back for. And so what's the main cause of this increasing inequality in Canada? It turns out that we can point the finger at marginal tax rates for the highest income earners as being the predominant source of this increase in high income for the highest income earners. The top marginal tax rate in Canada in 1981 was 43%, and the top marginal income tax in 2010 was 29%. Okay, that's a dramatic decrease over the past 30 years. Okay, another thing you can think about that may be causing part of this increase in inequality, not just at the top 1%, but if you look at some of our other measures of inequality, the ones that focus on the middle part of distribution, we see that we haven't been increasing. We've flatlined in decreasing inequality at the middle part of distribution as well. And a lot of people suggest that the reason for that is the low probability of success in the labor market for immigrants in Canada. Okay, that historically, immigrants in Canada have done a lot better labor market until about the last 30 years. Okay, so what can we do about this income inequality? I think that probably the best way to address this is through taxation. Taxation and transfers. If we really think that it's important to help those with low income, we can target transfers directly to individuals with low income. And I really think that it's important to take some income from those who earn a lot. It's important to address that by targeting our taxes for those income earners who earn a lot. Before we think about exactly what kind of tax policies we can implement, we have to remember that there's two important attributes of taxes we have to concern ourselves with. One is the efficiency properties of the tax. We don't want, for example, people to do less work because of the imposition of the tax. We don't want people to evade the tax if it's easy to evade. And the other thing that's to address is the equity considerations of the tax. We'd like it to be the case that people who are trying to help are not made worse off because of the tax being imposed. So the thing I want to tell people that I think may be new for some of us today is to not think about taxation. When we think about taxation, to not think about the statutory incidence of the tax, but rather the economic incidence of the tax. And what I mean there is that the statutory incidence of the tax is who actually is responsible legally to pay the tax to the government, whereas the economic incidence is looking at who actually bears the tax. Okay, and I think that in Canada, over the last couple of years, at least what I've seen in the media, people have been addressing this rising income inequality by suggesting that we raise corporate income taxes. But if we look at the data, you see that those top income earners, the amount of income they're earning from corporate income has remained the same over time. It's the income they get from wages that's increased. So we don't really want to target these high income earners with a corporate income tax rate increase. For that reason, it's not targeted where we actually want the tax to sit. The other reason is that the statutory incidence of the corporate income tax is applied to the corporations. They are responsible for remitting the tax payments to the government. But the economic incidence of that tax rarely sits with the corporations. When corporate income tax rates increase, often what we find is that there are decreases in fringe benefits for employees. There are decreases, or at least less scheduled increases in wages and salaries for employees. And also consumer prices tend to increase. Okay, so when we think about taxes, we want to make sure that we don't bear the burden, we don't place the burden of the taxes on those individuals that we want to be helping. We want to help average wage earners in Canada, or especially the low income wage earners in Canada. A corporate income tax may not be the best way to do that. Just a moment here, I'm going to make sure I get the right slide here. So just to make it clear about this economics of tax incidence, let's think about a situation. Just for example, imagine everybody here in this room, we all purchase coffee today, and that's the only good in the room that we can possibly purchase. And we can consider putting a tax on coffee. We want to determine who actually bears the tax that we place on coffee. What we have to do is look at the consumption of everybody in the room of coffee. That's the only thing that people can consume. And the person whose coffee consumption has decreased by the dollar value amount of the tax revenue we've raised from taxing coffee is the person or persons who bear that tax. So if we place a tax on coffee that raised $100 in revenue today from all the coffee sales in this room, so what we have to look at is whose coffee tax has decreased. Where does the coffee consumption decrease? Those people whose coffee consumption has decreased by a dollar value of $100 will be the ones who bear that tax. Okay? And so, for example, it could be the case that everybody in the room, has paid a fraction of the tax, and the person selling the coffee has also borne a fraction of the tax as well. But how we determine who gets which shares of the tax depends on the competitiveness of the market, essentially the market power that the participants in the market have. So, for example, we think about the corporate income tax, for example. I keep talking about it because I really don't like it that much. It seems to be the tax that people go to when they want to address inequality issues in Canada, but it seems to be the wrong one. And here's the reason. If we think about placing a corporate income tax, what happens is that if the employers who statutorily bear the burden of that tax pass it on to their workers, then we're actually hurting those people who we actually wanted to help with the tax. And what would matter most for that, whether that actually happens, is the extent to which the workers are able to bargain for their wages, right? So one thing, we look at corporate income taxes and how much the burden is borne of the corporate income tax by labor around the world. What we find is that actually in Canada, compared to the UK and the US, the corporate income tax is not borne as much by labor as it is in the UK or the US, because we have higher rates of unionization in Canada and the US. In Canada than in the US or UK. So that increases our ability to bargain with our employers if we're unionized, and therefore they cannot pass on as much of that tax. But still, a lot of the tax gets passed on. So what I would suggest as a way of dealing with these high-income earners are a couple of solutions. Since I'm here, I should give you my wish list of taxes. It seems like if people want policy ideas, here are mine, okay? First, forget about income tax for a minute and think about our process of taxation. And what we really care about is the consumption of individuals, not just their income. We care about income because it's correlated with the consumption of individuals. So one of the best ideas I think I've heard of in a long time is to actually broaden the base for the GST and increase the transfers we give to low-income individuals. Okay? In particular, if you think about the people that you know that may be in the 1%, think about what they spend a lot of their money on. It turns out that they spend a lot of their money on food. Not just the same kind of food that us 99%ers eat. They eat very expensive food, but they pay no taxes on those food purchases. Okay, so if we increase the base of the GST to include food items, we would be taxing a bit more of the consumption of those high-income earners. Okay, it turns out those high-income earners do spend a lot on food items. Caviar, for example, is not getting taxed with the GST. That's a problem, right? So if we increase the base and include caviar and all other food items just to make it easier to implement, what we can do is we raise more revenue and we can remit that back to the low-income earners. We give bigger checks to low-income earners so that they don't actually bear the burden of that increase in the base of the GST. Okay? Another thing that would be more beneficial if we want to address inequality in consumption, before thinking about the income inequality, if we want to address inequality in consumption, what we could do is stop the increase in tax expenditures by the federal government. If you look at transfers made by the federal government, an increasing share of transfers made by the federal government are going to high-income earners. Okay? These transfers are being made, and they're very inefficient. We want the high-income earners not to get more money back from the government. We want them to put more money into the government. Okay, so we have to stop these tax expenditures, simplify the tax system, increasing targeted transfers to low-income individuals, and stopping these kinds of transfers for if you buy a new home, for example, or if you do renovations on your property, for example, or if you enroll your children in some sports program. A lot of the low-income earners are never going to get access to those transfers, okay? And those are going to make our after-tax inequality even worse. So getting on to the income taxes, one thing we can do, also, aside from taxing those high-income earners directly, which is the last thing I'm going to say, but is to actually decrease some of the marginal effective tax rates on the low-income earners. Okay? So in BC, for a family with 2 children, if their income is if the household income is between $18,000 and $30,000 in a year, the effective marginal tax rate they face is 80%. Okay? If your income is above $30,000 a year, your effective marginal tax rate is 40%. What I mean by effective marginal tax rate is how much more your income that you can spend on consumption increases for 1 more hour of work, okay, or $1 more of earned income. So if you're earning between $18,000 and $30,000 in BC, for earning $1 more of income, you only take home about 20 cents. Whereas if you earn above $30,000, you earn $1 more for income, you take home about 60 cents. Okay? Well, the reason why it's happening is because of clawbacks on benefits that we give to low-income individuals. And we claw them all back all around the same, all at around the same levels of income. So if we would stagger those clawbacks, we'd actually be able to reduce the effective marginal tax rate and increase the incentives for these low-income individuals to work more. They'd have more income, inequality would go down. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to mention is those marginal tax rates. You know, they're really the easiest way to increase equality in income in Canada would be to reverse the trend that we've seen over the last 30 years and start increasing those marginal tax rates on the highest income earners. But in particular, we may want to actually not just increase the rate, but introduce a new tax bracket. Okay? The threshold for the highest tax bracket at the federal level is $128,000. Remember, the threshold to be in the top 1% of income earners is about $163,000. Okay? And the rate that those individuals pay to the federal level is 29%. We want to get the combined rate based by individuals in BC who are facing the top federal rate. They face a rate of 43.7%. Okay? But what we could do is actually introduce a new tax bracket, say somewhere around that threshold for 1%, and tax those individuals at a higher rate, if that's what we actually care about. And there seems that there's some capacity for this. For example, in the United States, the highest income tax bracket at the federal level is $379,000. Okay, that's dramatically higher, a very higher threshold, and a larger tax bracket than we have here in Canada. And the rate that they tax them at in the U.S. at that threshold is 35% for income earners over $379,000. Okay, so that's basically all I wanted to say. Thank you for your attention, and I hope I didn't bore anybody.